said the downfall or the industry was going a bit downhill. What was it? Well, like looking back now, what were the like contributing factors?
Well, I think it's a couple things. I mean, you were getting into downhill at the time, but if you look at what we were riding in the late 90s, we were riding like kind of crappy tracks that were kind of like bush league, built in the bush, right? Or we were riding like truck trails. So the trails we were riding just weren't that good. The bike park hadn't evolved. So as mountain biking, climbed and hit its pinnacle in the 90s, because mountain bikes were cool. They were new. You could get suspension on them. But were they really that good? No. Were the trails we were riding in the 90s really that good? No. So the sport kind of had to like regroup. It kind of had to take a step or two back to take a bunch of steps forward. The bikes had to get better. The trails had to get more fun and better to ride. They kind of just had to get their stuff together. And that's where I just think like they had such a peak in the 90s of everyone bought a mountain bike because it was so cool to have a mountain bike in the 90s. But I don't think a lot of them came back to buy a second bike or a third bike. I'm sure a small percentage of the core enthusiasts did. So it was kind of a bit of a bubble, like not an inflation bubble, but just a trendy bubble of mountain bikes were so cool and so trendy, but they needed to reset itself. And nowadays you look at core mountain bikers and yeah, they'll buy a new bike every 2 or 3 or 4 years. That just didn't happen a lot in the 90s. And people just kind of sat, and then some people just got out of the bikes, and then it just had to reset and regroup itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's really cool insight. And there was like global recessions happening and things like that. So people maybe tightening budgets and going, hey, we tried this mountain bike thing. It's not as mainstream as we thought, things like Mountain Dew pulling out and all those, you know, and then the Norbas, you said you saw the downfall of the Norbas. Like what happened there? So the North American racing, because when I got there, it still had a chance, and then they just drove it into the ground, I guess, or it got driven into the ground.
2 things: Lance Armstrong and sponsorship. So Lance Armstrong was winning the Tour de France, and Norba was part of USA Cycling. So Norba was the National Off-Road Bicycle Association, which then was part of USA Cycling. So USA Cycling had road cycling, which was just exploding because of Lance. So sponsors started pulling out of mountain biking, and then road cycling was just elevating. And Norba just finally said, we're good. So yeah, that's the simple aspect that I saw.
That makes sense. And I overheard some people that worked for the organization say, like, there were certain things they weren't helping the pros with, and maybe charging too much for pit space and making it difficult for the teams to want to come.
Totally.
And then they would say, but the pros are a small portion of who's here. We're here for the amateurs. I was like, I don't want to be silly, but the reason the amateurs also come is to see the pros, and they aspire to be the pros. So you should look after the pros. And the minute one vehicle leaves the paddock, the next one thinks, is it worth going? And then the more the pros weren't there, it's like, okay, but then the amateurs stopped going as well. So that was a small contributing factor, but that's how I saw it. I was like, I don't know. I think you should look after the pros. The more pros are there, the more credibility the event has.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's well said. So well said. And, you look at some of the big festivals, right? You look at Crankworks, you look at Sea Otter, they're all doing really good. Would they do that good if the pros weren't there as well too? And would some of the other companies go if it was just an amateur only festival, So I think there's a huge opportunity here in the US for festivals, for mountain bike racing. There's some good stuff going on with the US Pro Downhill Series, it looks like.
Yeah.
But you gotta have that mesh of that blend. But I'll tell you this, and outdoor events are thriving here in America. I know that. They are thriving. You just go to concerts. I mean, forget that Taylor Swift girl, but you just go to any concert nowadays. Like, I'm a big Metallica guy. Do you know what it costs to go to a Metallica concert at a stadium nowadays? It's insane.
No. What does it cost?
People want to be outside, like $400.
Jeez,
people want to be outside. They want to enjoy life, and especially active people. You can provide some good opportunities. And where better to spend a weekend than a ski resort during the summer? I know I'm totally biased, but I'd way rather go to Vail during the summer than the winter. And I'd way rather, go to Park City or Whistler or, Mount Snow, Vermont, or Mount St. Anne, Quebec, Canada. Like, those are just awesome places to go. I mean, you could go to like a big amateur motocross race here in America. They're still getting hundreds, if not thousands of riders. So it could be done. It'll just take the right combo of promoters, but it takes money to do it too at the end of the day, right? Like it takes
Yeah,
money
well,
to
you've always
make
got to
money,
follow
so
you got to follow the money, don't you? And that's I don't know what the core fan says, and maybe we can clip this and it's a comment. Like I see that with Crankworks. I did a lot of work with him with the commentary, and I was a big promoter of this series, and I still am. I just find it challenging when not all the pros are there, so then I'm less interested in watching. So does that mean the broadcast, like you need to find a way to entice the pros to be there, and that's what like they do now with this US series, is bringing back US Open, and it's a passionate guy, Clay Harper, and saying like he knows how important it is. The reason the US Open did so well in the previous times is the prize money. So that was cool, but they looked after the riders. Like they provided lunch, and like they clearly worked with a team, so it was credible to be there and was credible to go win the race. To get a US Open podium, like that meant something. So they looked after the pros that way, and that's, I think, how you can do it. And then the outdoor festival thing is a cool idea, and I don't think anyone's quite done it. Is it possible to have music concerts at the same time, so the people that come into the World Cup have that to say, okay, we're taking our families, but there is something for everyone, because dad and the son want to go watch the downhill, mom and the daughter are like, there's nothing to do up in this town, but maybe there's a bit more festival style thing,
Well, I think the ski resorts are awesome. I mean, so Snow Summit in Big Bear, 3 summers ago, I took my daughters downhill mountain biking. So I have 5 daughters. I'm a dad of 5 daughters.
You what? Best thing. That's amazing. 5.
Yeah, 5 daughters. They're awesome. And they all ride bikes. None of them are super competitive. We got some basic hardtail bikes, but we were on a summer vacation. I live in Texas now. I don't live in California. And we go to Big Bear, and my good friend Ryan Wormsbecker runs the bike park up in Big Bear at Snow Summit. And so I take my 4 older girls, but my youngest was only like 5 or 6 at the time, but they have trampolines there for her. They have rock climbing walls. They have zip lines. They have summer tubing. So the ski resorts are getting it. Back to your point or your question about what happened with the industry, going downhill, was the ski resorts really needed to figure out summer revenue, which of course a big part is mountain biking. You go to Snow Summit nowadays, they run 2 high-speed lifts. They'll have a 30-minute wait in the line because they've really figured out, no joke. So back in the day, remember they'd run 1 lift. Now they run both high-speed lifts. They got trails all over. But at the bottom, they have rock climbing, and they have a beer garden. They have they're grilling food up at the top and at the bottom. So these resorts, they're there. They're primed for. They've really figured that out, which is cool. I love to see that. So I have a question for you, because you're a little bit closer to it than I am. And maybe there's some guys listening to this that might get mad at me, but why don't pro downhillers race more? There's only 8 World Cups, 7 World Cups, 1 World Championships, your country's national. I mean, does Luke Bruni race more than 10 times a year?
Well, at a high level, probably not. I mean, he was at the Euro Champs now, so he might do the national champs. There's the Euro Champs. There's a preseason. To be honest, like if you're not sort of forced to by your team, then what is it worth the admin and the pressure and the risk? To ride at that level for what? What's the payoff? Same as Greg. Like, it's no surprise. I think the older you get, it's like, well, you pick and choose when to peak. The youngsters are still hungry, like they're trying to prove themselves. Like, to me, don't the older guys have more to lose at a smaller race than gain? What do they got to gain? You rock up at a smaller race, you're a little bit conservative because you don't want to get hurt because you're preparing for Worlds. And then people are like, why'd you get 5th? It's like, well, I don't know, it's a prep race. So to answer your question, like, they don't race more because there's not enough high-level races that they're incentivized to do, and that the teams think that there's reason to do it, credibility to do it. Like when I raced, we did the Crankworks Festival because the team invested in it. So then that, yes, it got me bonuses, but it got me good standing with the team if I did well. I got a podium. They were happy. That was good for contract renewal. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but you need bigger, high-level, credible races, and you need the teams to invest, but you need the organizers to realize we need to basically beg, borrow, and steal to get the teams here. And that's why I think you're missing it. Like Innsbruck used to have a better downhill. Now, that's not their flagship event. They do the slopestyle. My question is, but why not make the downhill unique? Why not get more riders there? You know, and then you would have people racing more often, and we would tune in. Like, wouldn't you? I mean, depending on the lineup.
It's a lot of catch-22 and chicken before the egg thing, right? Like, you gave all those scenarios of, do the teams invest? Does the promoter invest? The riders, I totally get your point on the riders. Do they want to risk it? You got to put all those pieces together. And I'm sure Crankworx seems like they have the platform to do that. That Canadian Open DH track looks rad.
Insane. So cool, right?
Rumor has it they might be getting a World Cup in the future. I don't know if that's true or not.
But we've heard it for 15 years. I just hope it becomes...
Okay.
Hey, but that's...
I heard that new track was part of the reason why, though.
Yeah, makes sense. It'd be really cool. Yeah. I mean, conspiracy theories and rumors are just false until they're not, right? So... Yeah, you had a good track and you had a good rider list and people tune in.
Yep.
And like you say, so they do have the recipe to make it good. And sometimes scheduling is a challenge, and UCI and Warner Bros. Now, I guess, own the schedule a bit, right? They seem to have the power on the schedule. I'm not in those rooms. I don't know how that works. So you got to fit in with the schedule. And you need these venues to have basically tourism money, from what I can gather, to take the risk to put on the event because it's costly. So you've got all those contributing factors.
Costs have gone way up,
But and you can't just suddenly get 16 World Cup rounds because the teams can barely afford 8 now. Like, that's their budget. So if you go 16, you almost double the budget. But I think 10, 11, I think you should easily be able to do 10 and make it work for organizers as well as teams, right? So that would be cool. But that's maybe why downhillers don't retire so early, because they're not as burnt out. You got motocross, supercross riders. I don't blame Villapoto, Dungey. They're like, well, I got cash for the rest of my life. What's the point? I'm burnt out. That's not a grueling industry.
It is interesting, though. I mean, look at Tomac's into his 30s now, and Justin Barsha, Ken Roxon, Jason Anderson, Malcolm Stewart. There's a whole bunch of guys that are into their 30s now, and they're still racing. But back to the point of the downhill guys, as we're discussing this, I mean, if the teams and their sponsors, which are mostly bicycle OEMs, aren't saying, we need more exposure, we need you to be in the limelight more. I mean, I've worked in marketing most of my life, back to when we had Crank and why we started the Crank race team. I don't get how they can justify, I mean, I know it takes a lot of money, but 8, 9, 10 races of exposure a year. Like, if you look, and I know it's a cost thing, right? So, okay, how much are you paying? How much exposure are you looking to get? And I don't know how they go to the bosses and go, okay, we're going to go spend $1 million on our team budget this year, which some of the bigger downhill teams are close to that. And we're going to get 10 races of exposure. I don't know.
No, I hear you loud and clear. And I think the salaries wouldn't really go up much. There's only a few riders that could maybe demand more if you say, hey, we suddenly got to do 20 races. It's like, no, dude, we pay you year round. Yes, we pay you to train. Now social media is a thing and all that. But you're right. Like, they should get creative with the budget and hopefully do more. But I think it's down to money again. It's down to money again. It's probably, I don't know how much it is a weekend, $20,000 a weekend to go to a race. Maybe you got your mechanics, you got your food, you got your accommodation, travel there and back.
At least, yeah.
So if it's a foreign race, like, it's way more.
Yep.
So there's probably not a team that's putting $1 million in, I would guess. Maybe half a bar. Plus they got but they've also got the co-sponsors, I guess, inclusive of salaries. They probably have to these days. Fair enough.
Specialized is one of the teams, and I'm not trying to get into anyone else's business, but I ran a supercross race team for a little while too, and just knowing how it works. But Specialized is one of the teams that they don't have a tire sponsor because it's their own tires. I don't think they take any money from Shimano or SRAM, which are typically two of the big other sponsors. So components and tires. So I'm saying they are putting that in.
Oh, and gear. And gear
now too.
Yeah, true. So fair enough. Then your guesstimate's probably way closer to mine. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Totally.